We are going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome. My name is Julia Barton with the Organic Farmers Association. Thank you for joining us today. Please take a moment in the chat to introduce yourself, your farm or your organization, maybe what type of farming you're doing if you are a farmer, and what type of work you're doing if you're an organization. We are grateful to the Transition to Organic Partnership Program for supporting the work that went into this webinar, and to our colleagues at Organic Farming Research Foundation and the National Organic Coalition for including OFA in the Seeds of Success Coffee Chat series. Just wanted to note that the Seeds of Success series continues from here, and we will be hosting the next coffee chat of the series as well. Our colleague Lily Hawkins will be presenting the next session and hosting the discussion on cultivating change, insights on how organic producers shape the 2023 Farm Bill and programs. So please do stay tuned about that upcoming meeting, and we'll look forward to continuing to be a part of this series. Whoops. So our agenda for today is here just so you can take a look at it. What is OFA? We're going to talk about who's in the room, and then we will be hearing from Seth Kreck of Crystal Springs Farm and Noah Wendt of A&W Farms. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers and discussion. So what is OFA? The Organic Farmers Association was founded by organic farmers for organic farmers to provide a strong and unified national voice for domestic certified organic producers. Our purpose is to build and support the farmer-led national organic farmer movement by developing and advocating for policies that benefit organic farmers, strengthening and supporting the capacity of organic farmers and farm organizations, supporting and collaboration and leadership among state, regional, and national organic farmer organizations, and welcoming support and cooperation with like-minded individuals and groups. Questions may occur to you during the webinar. Please do feel free to pop those into the chat or to jot them down to share with the group. As I noted, there will be plenty of time for discussion at the end and networking. This presentation is being recorded, and everyone who registered will receive the recording via email a little later this week. It will also be posted to the Organic Farmers Association YouTube channel. In a few minutes, farmers Seth Kreck and Noah Wendt will share with us about their experiences in using various forms of crop insurance. Both Seth and Noah have been an active part of OFA's crop insurance work group, which has been thinking about and discussing various aspects of crop insurance, its benefits, its challenges, and how to make the farm safety net work better for organic farmers and all farmers. We also have other work groups. We have one on organic dairy. We just wrapped up one in preparation for this spring's National Organic Standards Board meeting, and we will be launching one on farmers' experiences with the Natural Resource Conservation Service programs. So we do welcome your participation in the work groups, and we'd love to see you there. We also have a number of farmer circles. So these are informal networking opportunities for farmers in a collective group. And we also have affinity groups, including a Black farmer circle, an Asian farmer circle, a queer farmer circle, and a Hispanic, Latino, Latina farmer circle. So we'd love to have you join us in that space as well. The ideas that are shared in the farmer circles and in the farmer work groups do help inform OFA's policy positions as we think about what needs to be focused on, what areas require further and deeper work, and how we can advocate best for organic farmers. So my colleague Harriet is posting some links in the chat, and here will be one for the Farm Bill Marker Bill tracker for you to check out the marker bills that OFA supports, some of which directly relate to the topic that we're gathered to discuss today. If you are curious about organic farming or need help connecting with resources or information about organic farming, please feel free to call our farmer helpline, which Harriet will also post in the chat a link to that. And we'd love to have you as members. If you're not already an OFA member, we would welcome that. Having shared all of that, farmer circles and work groups, I'd like to say who's in the room. And I'd like to introduce Seth Crack of Crystal Spring Farm and Noah Went of A&W Farms. We'll let each of them do their own introduction at the beginning of their portion of the presentation. And we're moving over first to you, Seth. So I'll just pass it over to you now. And just a reminder, if you haven't already introduced yourself in the chat, please do that now. Take that opportunity now. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to be here with us. My name's Seth Cruck. I run Crystal Spring Farm and McCoy Wild Blueberries in Brunswick, Maine. Been certified organic since 2004 and farm on the Maine coast about half an hour north of Portland, Maine. I currently farm about 30 acres of organic carrots and Brussels sprouts, along with rotational crops. And for about 10 years now, have grown around 72 acres of wild low bush blueberries. Wild blueberries are a somewhat unique crop. Maine is the only state in the union where they're actually grown commercially. It is actually a wild crop. You'll find it in the understory of all the forests around here, and starting really around the time of the Civil War, they started to be grown commercially. Initially, families started gathering and raking them and sending them off to their relatives that were stationed around the country for the Civil War. And the commercial crop grew out of that. But it is a native crop here. When the initial European settlers arrived, they found open barrens that the Native American population had been tending by burning on and off for who knows how long. But it's a unique crop. It has very unique production practices. And because of that uniqueness, it really lends itself to being covered by specialty crop insurance. I mean, many of you who are on the call may already have a crop that is a part of your farm that you could never consider it a commodity crop, but it's a significant part of the income that makes up your farm, as well as just the character of your farm. And to lose that crop for a year or two would significantly challenge the viability of your farm year to year. And so if you have a crop that really fits that bill and wouldn't fit under a standard commodity, specialty crop insurance could really be a good candidate for you to getting some coverage and some risk management. We harvest our blueberries, and then we make several added value products to them. We package them frozen and sell them retail to local grocery stores, and then we also do some co-packing and currently we're making syrups. In the past, we've made jams and various other things. Specialty crop insurance has really been growing, both in kind of just the larger sense, but also very specifically in organic, especially in the last around 10 years. And because of that, agents around the country and in individual states are really starting to understand a little more. There are still some real gulfs of knowledge, agent to agent and county to county and state to state, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. but it is growing, and I think the more people ask about it and start to take advantage of it, the more it can really become a reliable source of risk management for growers, and especially organic growers. So, currently there's coverage on all kinds of very specific crops, and like I like to say almonds to tomatoes and kind of everything in between. If it's a unique specialty crop and it couldn't really fit into what is would be standard commodities, it's really a good candidate for specialty crop. The and the amount that it's used is kind of varies a lot from region to region and state to state. But if you really feel like there is a crop that's a major part of your farm and you really would like to seek some coverage for it, I'd encourage you to reach out to a local agent and start talking to them about coverage. They may not be familiar with your particular crop, but you can start the process of kind of getting your foot in the door, and hopefully at the end of the conversation, get some basic coverage that can keep you farming year to year. Coverage is based on what your yield average is per acre, and the price average by county. There are some exceptions to that. If you have a history of price contracts and documented pricing, there are some ways, and depending on what crop you're talking about, that you can negotiate pricing based on the pricing that you're actually getting. And the yield numbers are based on past yields. For me, wild blueberries are the crop that we're covering. We had to submit yield data going back 3 years, and it had to be documented. And so we currently send our whole crop to a processor to be cleaned and frozen. So we had very clear records for what we were yielding off of the acreage that we wanted to cover. But our specific example, so we carry 60% coverage at $1.30 a pound. And our coverage, so that translates into our coverage kicks in when yields fall below 60% of our average yield history per acre that we harvested that year. And once we get below that 60% number, we're paid the difference. So we don't really have a claim until we get to that 41% yield loss. You can change that coverage, generally starting out at 50%, and I think it goes up, at least for wild blueberries, it goes up to, I want to say it's 80%. So you can adjust what that number is in any given year, or you can have a multi-year policy written. But obviously, the amount of coverage you have, the greater the percentage, the greater your premium is going to be. I tend to look at crop insurance as opposed to a system that's going to make me completely whole from a crop loss, as more of a system that's going to keep me farming another year. And so I tend to get coverage on kind of the lower side, because I know that if we do have a loss, I'm going to be able to cover my production costs for that year, and have some left over to maybe purchase some other blueberries to keep our other products going, or just to get us back into the market for the following year. So in 2020, we had a very late frost, and we lost our entire blueberry crop for that year. So we have 72 acres that we cultivate. The way blueberries work is that 1 year you're pruning the blueberries, and then that same year you're pruning half of the blueberries. The other half of your crop is fruiting. And so you're only harvesting 36 acres of that 72 every year. So in 2020, we lost our entire crop on 36 acres. Our crop average was around 1,100 pounds an acre going back several years. So we had coverage on 1,100 pounds an acre times 36. That was 39,000, just short of 40,000 pounds of blueberries. That 39,600 pounds times 0.6, which was our coverage, our 60%, times $1.30 a pound means that we got a check for $30,000. Again, nowhere near what we were going to make on that crop, especially when you figure in the added value. But it was a way for us to recoup the cost of production that we'd put into that crop and allow us to keep coming back another year and farm some more. So, wild blueberries is our very unique crop. We have a crop insurance agent that's based in Massachusetts. And while wild blueberries weren't a completely new crop to them, there was an education process. We reached out to get our initial coverage and were given a date that we needed to be signed up by, and we met that date, but had some trouble because we didn't actually have an adjuster come out and look at our crop by that particular date. And so had a little bit of wrangling to actually get coverage. And that's just one example of kind of all of the different pieces that go into having crop insurance. What I would recommend if you're going to have crop insurance is to really start early. I would, think about trying to get coverage the spring prior to the crop that you're going to produce. And so like if you were going to start working on coverage for 2025, I would start working on it this spring. I'd reach out, I'd find an agent, I'd start talking to them about the details of your specific situation, what kind of coverage you're looking for, what the crop is, do they have some familiarity with it? How are they going to help you find pricing that will, on a per acre basis, that is going to make you whole, or it is going to give you the kind of risk that you need. And all the other working parts of that, getting your farm inspected by an adjuster, how are you going to make a claim if you need a claim? It's really good to start talking about this stuff very early. What I found is that the experience of crop insurance agents varies widely, both on the kind of insurance that they're offering, the crops that they're familiar with. And so starting the process early is a really good way to get some of those things ironed out before you actually get to the point where you need it. And you're pushing up against that deadline of having a policy actually in place. You generally have to have your policy in place in the fall before or in the spring, depending on what kind of coverage it is. And so knowing what those dates are and starting really far ahead, I think is really, really important. The other thing that I would say is that if you do end up running up against problems that you feel like are somewhat insurmountable with your individual agent, is to reach out to our USDA risk management. And there are several regional offices around the country. I ended up having an issue with my policy being written. I reached out to RMA in North Carolina, which was my regional office, and they were very helpful in kind of helping iron out some of the details and help me get coverage at the last minute. I think what's the sticky parts for organic growers is that the pricing is not always perfect or even that exciting, to be quite honest. And I think the more of us that have these conversations with agents and start letting RMA know that we are really interested in having coverage for our crops, the more we can start moving things in the right direction. I know there's some things proposed in the latest farm bill that could potentially really help us move that forward. But I think the more you can learn about the process, talk to other growers around you that have had coverage, and figure out exactly what might work for you. And then in closing, we've seen several years of really just wild weather in relationship to all of our crops, but particularly this wild blueberry crop. It's a perennial crop. And it doesn't have the flexibility of just adjusting your planting dates. It's going to bloom when it's going to bloom, and it's going to fruit when it's going to fruit. And when we get wild swings in weather, it really affects that crop. And so, I would really encourage you, if you have a delicate crop or you have a crop that you really think is really susceptible to some of the changes and swings in weather and climate that we're seeing, that I would encourage you to think about trying to get some coverage for it. Again, we're not talking about trying to replace all of our income, but really just trying to keep us in farming for another year and cover some of those costs of production.
Seth, for sharing all of that. I'm gonna move ahead here to Noah. Here is Seth's website. If you all want to follow up, I really enjoyed the pictures on your website, Seth. So I think everyone else might as well. It's a really unique crop and a really beautiful farm. We'll move over to you now, Noah, if you'd like to.
Yep. I'm Noah Went with A&W Farms, a farm here in central Iowa, and I also have a crop insurance business. I started crop insurance sales back in 2007 and have done that ever since alongside farming. A&W Farms, I have a partner in that operation. We started in 2005. We started to slowly transition our farm in 2015 from conventional row crop to organic. And now here in 2024, we have about 1,750 acres that's either certified organic or in transition. Probably another 300 that's just beginning transition in 2024, and then about another 1,000 that's non-organic. It's been a good experience for us, and as time went on, with growing the organic crops and transitioning as our agent for crop insurance, I was required to learn more about what it took to insure. So it's been a good adventure also there. And I'm able to extend out and help others insure some of their organic and transitional crops. Next slide. And thanks for everyone that showed up today and for having me here. It's an honor to share what we've learned. So I'm on the right there, and my farm partner is on the left. He's the A&W Farms, and we're standing there in front of one of our sunflower fields that we had grown in the last year. Next slide. So some things that I want to cover here, just basics of crop insurance, actual production history, unit structure, which kind of involves practice and type options within the units that we have, organic to transition to organic insurance, certified organic insurance, written agreements, and whole farm revenue protection. So the basic fundamental in crop insurance is actual production history, like Seth was talking about, where you basically have a yield history on all your individual units where you're producing a crop. You start with 4 years of production. You can put in any actual production that you had in the past, whether it was insured or not, as long as you can prove that the production was actually done. You would have to do that through sales records, more than likely. Or you can use the 4 years and fill some of it up with what they call the county T yield, which would be the average introductory yield for each individual crop. Yields in your history fall off after 10 lines or 10 years worth of production has accumulated. And on the next slide, I'll have an example of that. This in particular is a non-organic corn APH yield line that we have. As you'll see there, the the production goes from 2007 to 2016. I farmed that piece of ground from 2006 on. And so I had production on it, this non-organic production up to 2016. So there it just shows you that's a non-organic corn yield line and how the yields fall off after 10 of them are filled in. Next slide. Unit structure. You have different unit structures and you have different practice and type options. Unit structure is basically how do you want to ensure your individual fields within your county? And the very basic one is basic units. And that is ensuring all the crop within a county by your share of production. So if you had 50% of a crop on one farm and your landlord had 50%, but on another farm, you had 100% of the exact same crop, those two particular farms would be insured separately. The next step beyond that is optional units, and that's by crop. Stay back on that last slide there. That's by crop, by county, by crop, by section. And so that does not take into account what your share of the crop is. And the last one is enterprise units, which is basically by county, by crop. Every crop, corn, all the corn within the county, no matter what section it's in, would be all insured together. Same thing with beans and so on and so forth with all the different commodities. Next slide. Unit structure, practice and type options. Practice options on corn, soybeans, and oats. You have irrigated, non-irrigated, and then you have organic certified, irrigated, organic certified non-irrigated, organic transition, irrigated, and organic transition non-irrigated. And those all will have separate yield lines, like that picture that I had showed you earlier. They all have separate yield lines, but even though they have separate yield lines, it's all insured as corn. So if you choose a coverage level of 85% corn in Story County, Iowa, it doesn't matter which one of those practices it falls into, you have to insure all of the corn at the same level. Next slide. So the next step beyond that is type. And so within corn, we have several different types, and these two would have a separate yield line for each type that you have. But there again, as said in the previous slide, you'll be insuring all the corn at the same level within the county. And then you'll also have the unit structure dictate exactly how those are combined. So the different types of corn that can be insured are corn for grain, white corn, waxy corn, high amylase, and oats is just spring planted oats. And beans, as you can see, there's just regular commodity beans that would probably go to be in crush. And then you have several different types of food grade beans, all food grades, large seeded, small seeded, low linoleic, low saturated fat, and high protein. Next slide. So the next step beyond practice, unit structure, practice, and type would be different options that you can choose. And these are also chosen by crop and by county. And I'm just going to outline the ones that I think are particularly important for transition and organic practices. The first one would be contract pricing. This is a really good option for transition and organic producers. And essentially, the way it works, you can use the price from a contract that you have, that a producer has, instead of what the spring established prices are that the RMA comes up with. So an example of this is when we're in transition, we grow transition to organic, we grow non-GMO beans that we sell to Cargill. And so I submit by July 15th, our contract to the risk management agency and our approved insurance provider, and they basically override the spring price with that contract price. And the nice part about this is clearly in the situation that the contract price is higher, you're now receiving higher guarantees. It's a definite must to have that on as an option if you're transitioned to organic or organic. The next option would be quality loss. And the reason I believe that's important with organic and transition is that if you do have quality issues within your crop, as we're not able to treat it with insecticides or fungicides or any other pesticides, we could have some quality issues. And essentially what happens there, if you have this option included, it allows you to exclude any year from your APH database on that yield line, on those yield lines that you had a quality loss. And the next one I think is important is preventive planting. The general policy for crop insurance is if you are in a preventive planting situation, you get paid 55% of what your guarantee is. And literally for 2 to 5 cents an acre, you can add 5% onto that to get you up to 60%. Next slide. Other options, yield adjustment. It allows a producer to use 60% of the T yield to replace any given year when the production was low. So if you have a year where your production was 0 on corn, you're not going to actually have that show up as a 0. It's actually going to be 60% of the county T yield. Another great option that's super cheap to have and definitely helps that production history. And the last one would be yield exclusion. This would be another very cheap option anywhere. It allows the producer to in 2020, when we had a derecho come through, and there was a county right next to ours that they dropped well below 50% of the average county yield, and they allow any contiguous county to exclude that year also. So we're able to exclude 2020. We had very bad yields also, but they didn't drop below 50% of the average, but we still get to exclude that year because we're contiguous. Next slide. So here's an example of an organic transition APH yield line. If you look up on the top there, it says corn non-irrigated OT, and that's organic transition. So this gives you a good idea. You use 4 years. If you look up in 2015, 16, and 17, that yield line has 4 years of the county T yield at 137. And then I had 1 year where I grew in 2018 organic transition corn. So that stays on there. But then I never grew any more organic transition corn again. So it keeps pushing those yields up higher. And eventually they fall off after 10 yield lines are filled, which is beneficial if you have low T yields or even low production yields. You can start to fill it in with better yields. The price for organic transition, you use just the regular non-irrigated commodity price, just like non-organic corn or beans or whatever commodity that you're talking about there. So that's one of the downfalls to the organic transition, is that we're still subject to non-organic pricing. Next slide. Organic transition insurance. You start with 4 years of the organic transition T yield like that last slide showed, and then they continue to fall off there again after 10 years. And again, you use the non-irrigated organic price for the guarantee. Next slide. Written agreements, and I will know on the organic certified, it's the same. You basically start up a new yield line. It would be the exact same as the organic transition yield line. But you are then subject to organic certified prices that the risk management agency comes out with in the spring. So all the fundamentals are the same. It's just a different price that you use. One of the other options that we have that we've used for a couple years, and it's not quite as desirable because we just don't get as good of T yields by doing this, but sometimes necessary just to make ourselves whole, and is a written agreement. It's used when you don't have insurance available for the crop in the county. And basically an agreement It's an agreement that we submit to the risk management agency through our insurance provider. And the risk management agency determines the T yield that they'll use to insure the crop, that they'll allow us to insure the crop at. And it's usually a yield from the closest county that actually grows that crop. So for example, last year, 2023, we had hard red winter wheat. The closest county was one of the southern tier counties in Iowa that had a T yield. And we were able to use their T yield to establish our APH. They will also determine whether or not you can use just yield protection or revenue protection on the product, and the price that they'll use if it is revenue protection. And usually they just base this upon whether it's transition or organic written agreement that you're doing. Next slide. And this is just I want to give you a general idea of what a written agreement application is like. A lot of people get freaked out about it. It's pretty simple application. You do have to provide some documentation that's above and beyond normal. It's been nothing that's been overly burdensome, but it just isn't quite as good of a level of insurance just because of the T yields that they give you. Okay, next slide. So we used a written agreement to do relay planting on beans, and there's just a picture. We're out relay planting beans into this standing cereal rye, and on the left-hand side is the planter that we use to do that. The last option that we have, and I'll be honest, 2024 is the first year that we've used it, is whole farm revenue protection. And it's basically a safety net for all the commodities that you put under one policy. Definitely an excellent option if your farm produces several commodities that aren't insurable. And we're starting to enter that on our operation, where we just have probably about half of the commodities that aren't insurable. They are under a written agreement, but this is just a better option to actually insure what our revenue is. And it's good if you don't want to insure under a written agreement. For example, our farm, 2024 is the first year that we're using it. We grow corn, soybeans, oats, wheat, sunflowers, dry field peas, and hemp. So there's only, in the county that we're in, the corn, the soybeans, and the oats are the only ones that are easily insurable. So that leaves us open to insure the rest of those on a revenue basis and not expose ourselves to so much risk. We've insured under written agreements in the past, but feel like whole farm revenue is going to be a better option just because it's based upon what our actual projected revenues are going to be. And so hopefully this is a great year that we learn a lot from it, and it's worth taking out. Next slide. Just another picture, sunflowers, non-insurable. We could do it under a written agreement, but it's just going to be a battle to do it. So doing it under the whole farm is going to be a good option for this year. And this, the picture of our sunflower harvest, just threw that in there just for something fun to see. It's been a unique crop to grow and a lot of fun. And this is just a quote of whole farm revenue protection. It's basically, if you look on the left side, the commodities that we grow, you'll see there's 8 different types of commodities and what our projected revenue is. And up on the line there where it says whole farm revenue protection, RX level, 85% coverage, we have a projected revenue of 579,000 and can get a guarantee of $492,000 for $6,000 of premium. So it's subsidized really well, and it seems to make a lot of sense for the diversity that we have. I also want to add on any of these slides, if you can't see that stuff very well, please contact me, and I'm more than happy to send off some of these samples of some of the documents that we use. Next slide. And there's my contact information. Feel free to call, email, text whenever you want. I'm really passionate about helping people understand what these options are and learning along in the process with them. Thanks.
Tell us about this sunflower, Noah.
So kind of funny, we have several people that ask that want to have pictures out in the sunflowers. And the answer is always, yeah, go ahead and do it. And so one day me and my daughter were driving out to the farm and we drive by this sunflower field and she sees this plant and I keep going and she's like, Dad, there's a sunflower plant that's smiling. And so of course we have to back up, and sure enough, someone that was out taking pictures had picked these out of the sunflower head, and that's our farm in the background, the farmstead in the background. So it was a pretty fitting picture.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a great one. So at this point, we're gonna just stop. I'm gonna stop sharing and we'll just kind of invite you all to put your faces on camera if you're comfortable doing so, and raise your hand if you're comfortable doing so, and you can ask some questions that way. I'll also ask Harriet if there's anything in the chat that we want to make sure to cover off the bat.
I just think maybe just a little explanation between whole farm revenue protection and the regular commodity.
Noah, do you feel comfortable going into whole farm
Yeah.
a little more?
Yeah. Regular commodity insurance is, clearly based upon what your proven yields are and then what some established prices are times whatever coverage level you decide to take out. The whole farm revenue protection really is based upon, for lack of better words, what your Schedule F income has been over. It's somewhat based upon what your Schedule F income has been over the last 5 years. It also takes into account what your projected revenue is, and it's a little bit of a complicated equation, but basically your Schedule Fs have to show that your income has been almost as high, if not higher, than what your projected revenue for the current crop year is. And then that's how you establish guarantee levels. When it comes around to claim time, it's essentially, and I'm just going to put this in very layman's terms, it's essentially going to take how your Schedule F for that crop year ended up and say, all right, well, that's what your income was. Now, if there's a shortfall there, the insurance company is going to pay the difference. And I feel like I still have a lot more to learn about it, but so far quoting it out this year and just taking out our own policy has been a good experience to learn what I've just said.
Thank you, Noah. And I see there's some questions about micro farm, which is a portion of whole farm revenue protection. Did you want to share any more about that, Noah?
I'll be honest, I don't know hardly anything about micro farm, except for that the dollar limits are lower as far as what guarantees are. I want to say that it's like 100,000. It's really geared towards smaller production type farms. But I'll be honest, I don't know a whole lot about it.
Sure, and we can go into depth on that another time, but it is a program within whole farm revenue protection that is geared towards smaller diversified operations with the same sort of focus that Noah mentioned about revenue protection. Other questions? This is our opportunity to discuss. So if folks want to come on camera, yes, Laura, I see your hand. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, and again, I'm not good at the internet Zoom in. Okay, I've got a couple questions. We used whole farm revenue protection per Harriet a couple years ago, and one thing that they just never understood is that we're a hemp CBD producer as well, and so at one point the farm went on and distilled it down to kilos, and that made it so much more valuable than just raw hemp. I never could get that across to them, so I haven't been able to ensure the added value. I guess in my so we're growing organic sunflowers this year. And we do have a contract. So I'm going to try to use that. And then the other thing that was aggravating is that I never could insure my sort of tourist income. I mean, we have a Airbnb that's for farm tourism, and they excluded that over and over again. It's significant income. So does anybody know anything about this? Should I argue with my agent? What should I do?
Um, that's a good question. There's some ambiguity there, I believe, when viewing the Schedule Fs, and I think part of it depends on whether your accounting professional is what Schedule F income column they would be putting like the agritourism in, because I think if it's in other income on your Schedule F, then that's allowed on the whole farm revenue protection income portion. And so and that's where I think that there's probably still some, I don't want to say issues, but areas where it needs to be refined on the whole farm revenue protection as to how some of those income streams are defined and whether they're allowed or not. And I would certainly think that that one would be, and unfortunately, right now, from what I can see, it pretty well comes down to how your tax professional inputted it.
Okay, so I want to put it on other income and Schedule F.
Yeah, that counts towards your income. A good example on ours was they have custom hire income and they have other income. And, clearly the custom hire income on our farm is real income. It's for people that are farming, that we're
Sure.
working for, but if it gets thrown under custom farming, it doesn't count. If it gets thrown under other income, it counts.
Okay.
So I wish I had a better answer for you, and I just
No,
unfortunately I think that-
that's what we're all here to learn about the racket. I mean, we know it's a racket. And so that's helpful.
Well, the only thing I would say is that it's really important to get it on the Schedule F. If
Yeah.
you got your Airbnb on a Schedule C, which is a business not agriculturally related, then you definitely would not be able to.
And I'm pretty sure it's on my Schedule F. So I'm going to go back and look at all those Schedule Fs basically when I get back in my office. That'd be good.
Sure.
It's nice that we could have this one day after tax day, so we could go over the various stuff together here. I'll just note, Laura, and I know you said you've got a lot going on, but we would welcome you in our crop insurance work group to think through that in a group setting, because there's a lot of folks on there that know this from different angles and might have had experiences that might benefit you as you're thinking about how to make sure all of that's included in the whole farm.
And again, now that I can get around a little bit, I would love to be in that group.
Okay, we'll make sure you get the invite.
Okay.
But all of you are invited, just to be clear. It's a very, very wonderful group of people with a good learning environment.
So there is another question about how does the insurance differ from what FSA offers, which I believe is the NAP. And how is this insurance beneficial to small diversified farms, which are about 80% of the farms in New Hampshire? I'm not sure who would answer that.
That's another question on whole farm, I think. Does anybody want to take that or address the difference between what we've been discussing here and NAP, which is the non-insured disaster assistance program?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know a whole lot about NAP, except for people that do have specialty crops going to it. And I just think it's from what I've heard, an extremely low level of insurance. Like real close to catastrophic levels of insurance. So some people debate on whether or not they even want to take it out. But Seth, maybe you know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we actually had a NAP claim and did get a payout in a year when we had some difficulty with our specialty crop insurance, and so we had a lapse in coverage. And as you say, it did really equate to being catastrophic. I think it was about 40%. What it ended up being of our total yield, which was better than nothing, considering we did not have specialty insurance that year. But But yeah, I mean, I think it is worth, letting your your county FSA office know if you do have a loss in a year and you don't have coverage. You need to document that because you're not going to get paid out on it, and if unless you do document it. So I would say that. But I think, being in the Northeast, there is more emphasis being put on whole farm, because it does fit our smaller, more diversified farms a little better, from my understanding. I don't have the coverage myself, but I will say that there is a little bit of a gulf in experience and willingness of some agents to actually follow through on the coverage. And I'll just say that it's been from my experience. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't reach out and really push for it, because it is something that's offered. And they should be writing policies on it if it's something that you can get some risk management from. And so, I know we're busy and we're farmers, but I would encourage a little bit of activism on our part to push things along a little bit, because the variability of what we do as a living it's not getting less risky. It's getting more. And so it's really important that those of us that need and want some coverage have all of the different options at our fingertips. And so pushing the powers that be to really do what they said they would do and give us the coverage that is out there, I think is big. And so again, I'd encourage everybody to kind of reach out and see what's out there and what would fit for them, and have those conversations with their local agents.
My understanding too of NAP is that there's a lot more documentation. You have planting dates and rates, and if for you as a perennial grower, you wouldn't have as much to track. But
Right.
someone who does a lot of succession plantings through the summer, there's going to be a lot more documentation, and maybe still not get more than a catastrophic payout. So you'll be doing a lot of, whereas whole farm is just based on your revenue, and you don't
Sure.
have to, show them massive amounts of documentation of what you planted and when and where and what the expected harvest was, and all these other things that NAP kind of asks for. It really is much better for someone doing perennials than mixed annuals, especially in succession.
Right. No, I think that's a great point, Harriet. And I also think that NAP really isn't coverage. It's kind of stopgap, and it is catastrophic. And if you really are looking for coverage, you should really get a policy in one way, shape, or form. The other thing I will say about any of this, though, going forward, is that you really have to be diligent about documenting, and if you do have, as Harriet was saying, if you do have a lot of successions and you're insuring things over a longer period of time during a season, that gets complicated. The one thing that we have in our favor as organic growers is that we tend to make records, and that's a part of our organic system plan. And so you can shift some of that work that you're already doing and use it to help your insurance coverage. And so that's one thing I think that we have in our favor. But documenting, taking a lot of pictures so that you can refer to them later and you can show them to adjusters and all that kind of stuff is also super important.
Yeah, thanks for making that point. I feel like the organic farmers are better positioned than some farmers because of the record keeping requirements, which I think you noted a couple of different times. Jake Jacobs, I saw you had your hand up, and I don't want to put you on the spot because it seems like it's down now, but please feel free to jump in.
Hi. Thanks for the opportunity. I worked for the University of Vermont for many years on risk management education outreach. And there's a very common misconception about NAP coverage. NAP actually is not insurance, it's disaster assistance. And you have to experience at least a 50% loss to trigger that coverage at all. which means basically 50% of your loss, of your crop loss, is your deductible. And then it will pay a certain amount above and beyond that 50%, depending on what you opt for. It is not crop insurance. They're not the same. Crop insurance, federal crop insurance, is available through RMA, and you have to purchase that and get it serviced through a local crop insurance agent. Whole farm revenue basically will cover pretty much any crop you want. Micro farm policy is under that whole umbrella of whole farm revenue, but it's designed specifically for smaller operations that don't have quite those revenue extremes that whole farm will cover. But it's important to differentiate between NAP coverage, which is disaster assistance, versus crop insurance, which is the RMA product. Does that help to clarify? I'm just sorry this didn't come a little sooner because the deadline for whole farm was March 15th, and the deadline to enroll in micro farm was yesterday.
Yes, well, it is really fun trying to line up your educational programming with RMA deadline.
Yeah.
And we do appreciate you sharing that information, Jake. Maybe you would also like to join our group. It'd be wonderful to have you there. We have a meeting tomorrow as it happens.
I will pop my email address in the, I work for the University of Delaware and also for White River NRCD here in Vermont.
Okay, great. Great to meet you.
And I would love to be included. I'll pop that in there.
Yes, thank you. I did want to note it too, for those of you who might be interested in learning more about whole farm, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, NSAC, has a number of great blogs on crop insurance. They've been working on this issue for a long time. And in fact, the whole farm revenue protection product was born of the sustainable agricultural community. So while it's had a number of kind of tweaks and changes over time, I think it's a really important product that tries to make sure that crop insurance is accessible to diversified, small, various producers that don't fit the commodity kind of crop insurance mold. So just noting one of those blogs there, but there are a whole slew of them, and I recommend you peruse them if this is of interest to you. Oh my goodness, I just looked at the time. We are at 3 o'clock. Wanting to be respectful of your time, I'm sorry, we are at the top of the hour. Wanting to be respectful of your time and to thank Noah and Seth for their presentations and for sharing their experiences with the group here. And then to invite you all once again to check out OFA resources and opportunities for engagement. If you are an organic farmer, we want to be in touch with you. So please do reach out or join one of our groups so that we can check in and learn from one another. Thanks again, Noah and Seth. We appreciate you.